What's going on? This is Ryan with Automatic Comics, and up next, we are going to go over the top 10 sales from the recent Comiclink auction. We're going to look at which direction these books are trending in right now, if some were kind of some big sellers, some disappointing sales, all that kind of stuff. Got a couple extras in there too, because I thought they'd be fun to talk about. So let's get into these. Right, so before we get started, please remember to hit that like button and hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this. Normally, I do these videos on the weekly Heritage auction. This last week, we had one of the big featured Comiclink auctions. I actually picked up a couple books in this one, but the books I'm going to talk about this time are the top selling books, the top 10, and I picked a couple extras too that were right near that top mark because I thought they'd be interesting to talk about. So I'm going to switch screens so that I can share my screen and I can show these books, talk about these books a little bit more, because it seemed like in the last video I did that, people really enjoyed that. So let's check out these books. All right, so let's get into these books. Like I said, I've got a couple honorable mentions first, actually 3 of them that I wanted to talk about. The first one is this Ultimate Fallout 4, the variant edition, a 9.8. This is that Djurjevic variant that has had some really big sales, had some sales that broke 40,000, a $40,800 sale in June of this year. You can see here, this one sold for 33,000. So definitely on the weaker side, down by a little over $7,000, almost $8,000 actually. Now this one, I would not be surprised if we saw this book coming down in price. The reason being that there are actually quite a few of them out there. The total census is 833. The total universal is 731 with 164 9.8s. So actually quite a few of these books out here. So maybe it gets a little tough to justify the $40,000 price point, but I do think that it still deserves to be a expensive book, but I think it got a little overheated like a lot of other books out there. Now, for reference, this book was a $2,000 to $3,000 book just about 3 years ago. So let's take a look at that. So this is GPA. We've got Ultimate Fallout 4, and here's the variant edition. And so you can see that last sale here, June of 2022, was $40,800. This book has been on a straight line up for the last couple years. But I mean, let's look at that. Let's zoom in a little bit so it's a little clearer. So you can see 2019, low sale 1,881, high sale 2,900. Then all of a sudden we had a big jump in 2020, probably kind of like the start of the comic boom, probably late in the year would be kind of a guess. So yeah, 9,000 in November. We had 8,250, 8,000. So really right around the summer of 2020, this book started to spike. It was, I mean, even earlier that year, just $2,500 in February of 2020. And now this book peaked over $40,000. I mean, that's a jump of almost 20x in just a couple years. And so that's one way I would say just be cautious, with this book. It is a great book. I do expect that we'll see a fair amount of them actually come up for sale with prices at this point. And it'll likely be like what we've seen with like Amazing Fantasy 15, where you start to have them come out and you get a bunch of sales and it drops the price. But we'll see. Definitely one to kind of watch and see what happens. Now, the next book that I have on the honorable mention here is Amazing Spider-Man number 129. This is a 9.8. There were actually 2 copies of this book that sold in this auction in a 9.8. This is why I actually wanted to talk about this one. Now, this was a $34,000 sale. The record from just March 16th of this year was $57,000. There are a ton of these books on the census. Total census is 15,976 with 13,977 universal copies. There are 162 in a 9.8. Actually, right around the number of that Ultimate Fallout 4. But this was a book that from 2017 to 2020 was around $10,000 to $15,000. So it really, to me, isn't surprising that we're seeing this book correct. It went up 4x. I mean, at that 57,000 point, went up 4x. It's still up double. And so it's a book that personally, I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up getting back down into that kind of like low to mid $20,000 mark, which interestingly enough, 3 days, same auction, both white pages, same looking wrap. Like, you know, look at this book. So it's not like it's a perfect wrap or anything like that. Then we had 3 days later, this one, 24,817. I mean, I don't know who would be more upset, the buyer of the $34,000 copy or the seller of the $24,000 copy, because man, 10 grand. Well, let's say 9,200 in 3 days for a book that, I mean, look, it's a nice copy, white pages, just about the exact same wrap, maybe even a little better on this one, a little less of the white showing on the $24,000 copy. So I just thought this was a really interesting one because such a huge price difference in the same auction with the same page quality, same grade, everything. And just, yeah, that one, I just thought it was interesting to point out because such a crazy difference. Now, the last honorable mention before we get into those top 10 was Giant Size X-Men #1. I just wanted to talk about this one because it's another one of those big Bronze Age keys. It was on my Bronze Age list that I was talking about in a recent video. Now, this was a 9.8 that sold for $34,500. This one peaked in June of 2021 for $72,000. And actually, I do think there was an $80,000 sale on Comiclink, but GPA doesn't pull in Comiclink sales, so I can't remember for sure. That's always the tough part with the Comiclink sales. After they've happened, they delete most of their sales data, and most of the sites, including GPA, don't pull it in. And so you end up not having that data as part of the normal census. So it's something to think about. If you're paying a record price on Comiclink, that record price is very likely not going to be remembered even a couple months later. A few people might, but a lot of people won't, because they'll look at GPA, they'll look at cover price, look at Go Collect, and they likely will not see that sale. And so just something to be aware of when you are setting some of those record prices on Comiclink, which I'm going to talk about with one of these later ones. Now, this book has a total census, again, very large, 12,223, with 11,002 universal copies. In a 9.8, there are 219. So even more than you have for that Amazing Spider-Man 129. Now, this book was going around $10,000 to $12,000 before the comic boom. So also one that I'm not surprised that we're seeing a correction. I mean, jump from 10 to 12,000 to 70,000. 7x in about a year, maybe 2 years, is just, it's a little too much. And so again, another book that I would not be shocked if it comes back down into those mid 20s. I think there have even been a couple sales in the high 20s over the last couple months. So just something to watch with this one. Definitely a book that's been correcting. And just, if you're looking to buy it, maybe it's a time to start watching. But I think some prices are getting good in some grades, but definitely one to keep your eyes on. All right, so now let's get to that top 10. So here's number 10. Number 10 is Showcase number 22. This is the first appearance of Hal Jordan as Green Lantern. Now, this one, like Comiclink says here, is rare in high grade. It really is. And this is a nice copy. If you're familiar with this book, you can have copies that have a really dark green like this one that present really, really well. And some have this kind of like olive green, a really light green, and it's not fading. It's a different print strike for the book. I don't know if it was later on in the run where ink was running low or what, but you definitely have that variation. I really like the dark green that this one has. Now, the record for this book was in February 23rd of 2019 at 22,800. And so this was a new record for that book. This is a new record for about $12,200. That's over the course of 3 years. This really isn't a crazy jump for this book. This book is relatively uncommon for the Silver Age and very uncommon in high grade. Only 1,299 copies on the census, with 1,074 universal copies, only 14 in a 7.5, and just 20 higher. That's what we're talking about here. If you're talking about Silver Age Marvel, you're going to have hundreds of copies in a 7.5 and hundreds, if not maybe thousands, higher than that. And so this shows you how rare this book is in grade, and that's why this book is so expensive at just a 7.5. Now, let's take a look at GPA for this one. So we've got Showcase number 22. So with GPA, you can see that this book really just does not come up for sale very often in these higher grades. That's why in the last 90 days, you don't tend to have sales. You've got sales down in the 4.5, 3.53. This is the area where you normally see sales for this book. But when you start getting up even into mid grades, they get expensive quick and they do not sell often. This sale was extremely shocking. This was a sale from September, an 8.5 for $93,000. That was a monster. I feel like that was probably a bit of an overpay. that was a really big sale. But still, that shows you just how in demand this book is in high grade, because it just doesn't exist out there. But with this one, let's take a look at that at the 7.5. And you can see this is that trend for this book. Now, this was back in 2019. So if we extrapolate this out, maybe up around here, something like that, that sale at $35,000 really isn't out of line. I'd say that's well within reason for the trend that this book has followed over the last 5 to 10 years. And so I think that was a solid buy. And this is one of those DC keys that people talk about that just consistently trend up over time. Yeah, you have peaks and valleys, but over time, general uptrend for this book. All right, so now let's move on to number 9, and we're actually jumping into the golden age for this one. We've got Marvel Family number 1 with a crazy high grade, an 8.0. This is the first appearance of Black Adam. It is his only appearance in the golden age, and he does not appear again officially until the Bronze Age in Shazam number 28. He's also got that alter ego number 7 appearance, but that is, I think it's number 7. But that one's not officially part of the canon. Now, this is a really interesting book when you look at the price history for Marvel Family number 1. Now, this sale was pretty strong. This was a $36,699 sale. The record was from June of this year, and that was $45,600. So definitely a drop from that record, drop around 20%. But the movie wasn't all that well received, so it's not a huge shock that it's down. Now, this is a pretty rare book. Total census is 149, 138 universal copies, just 4 in an 8.0. And only 7 higher. The highest are 2 and a 9.4. Now, the thing that's the most interesting to me with this book is if we look at the price history for it. So let's check out Marvel Family number 1, and you'll see what I'm talking about, because this book, you will not believe how cheap this book used to be. It is shocking when you look at the prices from this book for, say, about 10 years ago. So let's look at that same 8.0. The last sale on here recorded, because again, this Comiclink sale will not get pulled in, was $45,600 in June. So let's look at an 8.0. We go back to 2010. This book sold for $657. I mean, that's crazy. That's crazy. In 12 years, this book has gone up, I don't know what that is, 80 times, something like that. About 70 times. I'd say it's about 70 times. In 12 years. That's nuts. If you looked at a comparable book like Amazing Fantasy 15, it has not gone up 70x in 12 years. This is an incredible move for this book. I don't know if it's sustainable, but even at that price drop of down to $37,000, this is still an incredible move. That's still 60 times the price that it was 12 years ago. And so if I owned one of these copies that I had bought back then, I would definitely be looking at selling it, because this book previously it wasn't in demand. It had almost no value earlier. Jumping back to 2002 for this one, 374. Let's see if there's any sales for these in the, so let's look at this one. Like 2014, $515 for a 2.5. Now that book is selling around $8,000 to $10,000. Just incredible price changes for this book. Just one that I thought was really interesting, because it is just crazy to me how cheap this book used to be. I have no idea what this book is going to do long term. I don't know how popular Black Adam is going to continue to be. The movie didn't do all that well, but with James Gunn at the helm at DC, who knows? Sky could be the limit with these DC characters. All right, so this is Marvel Family number 1. That was number 9. Let's go to number 8. And we have got one of the most popular Silver Age books, Fantastic Four, number 5, first appearance of Dr. Doom with the CGC 8.5 that sold for $40,000. Another book that has dropped considerably over the last about 5 to 6 months. The record for this book was from June 9th of 2022, just this year, at $60,000. However, the last sale from just November 19th was $39,600. So this was right around that last sale. So it's about what you would expect for the price of this book based on recent sales. But this book has pulled back a lot from where it had peaked earlier this year. A surprisingly uncommon book for the Silver Age. Just 2,111 copies on census with only 1,637 universals. That's really not very many for what would be arguably the most popular villain in Marvel, or close to it. In an 8.5, there are just 19 copies, and only 43 highest graded are 3 and a 9.6. Now, this is one that I think the prices that it has retreated back to in a lot of grades are starting to get pretty appealing. I think that they are getting to the point where I definitely would be looking at this book. I could see it coming back down a little bit more, especially since we didn't get any Doctor Doom in the, well, I haven't seen Black Panther yet, but I've heard people talk about it. We didn't get any Doctor Doom in the Black Panther movie, and a lot of people were speculating on that, which probably boosted the price of the book a little bit, but a lot of grades have retracted recently. Let's take a look at Fantastic Four number 5, and let's see what some of these prices have done, because it's definitely been coming down. And so let's look at a grade that maybe sells a little more often, like a 4.5. And so you can see, if you look at the trend this book was on, it's still above that, but it's definitely coming down from those peaks. I mean, let's look at the 5.5. I mean, that seems like a pretty low sale for this one. So yeah, like this 5.5, that's pretty much right in line with where this book had been. If you can kind of see my mouse on the screen there and where I'm tracking the line, if you extended it out from where it was prior to the comic boom, that sale is right in line with where it was before we had the big comic boom. So definitely a book that, depending on the grade, the prices are getting down into areas, like I said, that I think are starting to get pretty appealing. All right, now let's go to number 7. This will not be the only time we see this book on the list. There's actually 2 copies of Incredible Hulk number 181 on this list, but this was a 9.6. This has one of these stickers on it that says CVA. Basically, they put them on there for books that they are saying look exceptional for the grade. Now, if we look at the zoomed in image of this one, I feel like you can still see a couple little spine ticks. You know, like there's one here. There might be a little blunting in this corner here. It is a nice copy. It's very square. It's got a really nice wrap to it. You can see it's basically a perfect wrap. You don't really have any of the front cover showing through on the back. But it's not a book that I would see getting a 9.8. It's possible someone might try to resubmit and get that 9.8, but I think with a little bit of corner blunting, at least 1, maybe 2 spine ticks, little corner blunting here, I think it's the grade it's going to get. So yeah, I mean, it's a nice looking copy, but I think this was a pretty high price paid for this book. This is actually a record. This is $41,000. Prior record was January of this year, and it was $36,000. And this book has been selling recently between about $23,000 and $29,000 at 9.6. So this was an exceptionally high sale based on recent sales for this book. Again, like the other Bronze Age books I talked about earlier, this one is very common. Total census, 16,303 copies with 12,963 universals. 9.6, there are 347 copies and 138 higher, with 9.9, which again, I would love to see that one come up for sale in a public kind of like live auction forum. Now, like I said, I would not have paid the $41,000 for this book personally. I think that was pretty high considering this book sells regularly enough in this grade, and it's been selling around $10,000 to $15,000 less than this one. But someone decided they really liked this one, like the look of it. Maybe they thought they had a chance at getting that 9.8 and they're going to go for that resubmission. I don't think it's going to get below a 9.6, so there's not a ton of risk there, but you do have a lot of additional expense that goes with grading a $40,000 comic because you have to pay CGC 3% of value. So just grading the book is going to cost you about $1,000, maybe a little more. So just something to consider if you're ever wanting to try to resubmit a book like this. This is one that, like we've seen with those other prices, I think settling around the mid-20s is where this book is likely going to end up. And in a lot of sales, it has gotten there already. So this is another one that has corrected down in a lot of grades to the point where I think it's really worth looking at again. So I don't know if we want to take a look at this one real quick. You can see what I'm talking about. So this one sells all the time. So it's easy to find a lot of sales data for it. But let's look at a grade like a, let's see, like an 8.0. So because it had a sale already in this month, in December. And you can see here, if you look at the general trend for this book, it hasn't continued to correct down, but it's stayed flat for a while now. And so that's the two ways that I see this playing out, is that you have books that are correcting back to the trend line or staying flat until they reach the trend line again. And this one, it probably still has a little ways to go, but it seems like it's getting pretty stable around these price points. I mean, this right now around 6,500 for an 8.0. Yeah, it's high compared to where it was 2 years ago, but it's not unreasonable, especially since we have Wolverine in the MCU now. And a lot of grades are like that. You'll see that it's a little less than double of where it was 2 years ago, which to me isn't crazy for this book. So definitely one that, let's look at a 6.0. They're all following a pretty similar trend here. And this one's getting a little closer to that trend line. So definitely the time when you really might want to be looking at this book if you've been waiting to pick up a copy. All right, now the next one I think is going to get some people heated. I always like talking about this book because I feel like I get to kind of like poke at some collectors, because a lot of people just they get riled up about this specific book because they just, I think a lot of people have a hard time accepting that this is the price that this book sells for. This is Amazing Spider-Man number 667. This is the Delato variant. This is a 1 in 100. This is one of the books I talked about in a prior video I did on rare variants that have a lot of value. And this is the top of that list. This is the most expensive modern book. This book has claimed that title. It costs more than that Ultimate Fallout 4 variant, which would have been the only other real contender there. But I mean, check this out. $42,000 for a 9.8. That's not even the record. The record was from June 16th of this year at $43,200. That's one of the things I like to point out with this. You talk about like Amazing Fantasy 15 or a lot of these other Silver Age keys, they have been tanking in that same time period. This book has retained its value very well. And I know I'm going to get comments and people are going to say they don't understand it or they don't like it or they don't care. But I just want to point out that this is a modern book that just has retained its value because largely of scarcity. That's really the main reason. I think it's a cool cover. I like this depiction of Spider-Man. Delato always kind of draws in the same way, so it gets a little old after a while, but I do like this depiction of Spider-Man from him. But this one, it only sells in this grade about 1 to 2 times per year. This is one of those times. It is a rare book on census. Only 68 copies. Total universal copies are 63, and there are 23 in a 9.8. So much less common than that Ultimate Fallout 4. This is one of those ghost books. This is the big variant key that if you're a modern variant collector, this is the one you want. And I love seeing this one sell, just because I like pointing it out, because I always think it gets people riled up. It gets that discussion going about these modern variants, because this is the book. This really is. And I think it's always fun to see this one come up for sale. But one of the things I wanted to show with that was the interesting thing with this book to me was that it just has been very consistent. It has been very consistent in its prices. It hasn't done any real crazy spikes. And so if we look at this Delato variant, I mean, look at this thing over time. I mean, no real big jumps. It's just consistently gone up on average when it comes up for sale. It doesn't come up for sale often. I mean, look at this. 2013 had a couple copies, then didn't sell again for 4 years, then didn't sell again for 3 years. 1 copy last year, 1 copy this year, and then this copy that obviously won't end up on GPA. But real consistent increase in price. I mean, it seems like a pretty solid investment book. I cannot argue with the results. It's a little scary thinking about a book that's only really valuable because of the fact that it's rare, but that's the case with this one. And it seems to consistently it commands that value year after year. But all right, Let's move on to number 5. So number 5 is Strange Tales number 110 in an insanely high grade, and 9.4. This is also the Northland pedigree. This was $52,000, but this was well short of the record. The record was set in just September of this year at $72,000. There are 2,205 copies on census with 1,880 universals. There are 15 in a 9.4 and only 6 higher. All are 9.6s. There are no 9.8s. I almost never see this book come up for sale on this type of grade. This is an incredible grade for this book. And honestly, I think whoever bought this made a great purchase. This book had sold for $55,200 in 2019 before the comic boom. I don't even think the $72,000 purchase was a bad buy. I think that was a good purchase for this book. This book is just so difficult in grade. Yeah, it's got, unfortunately, it doesn't have a great cover. The first appearance of Doctor Strange, it doesn't have him on the cover there. It doesn't have Wong on the cover. It doesn't have the Ancient One on the cover. None of those big first appearances are on this cover, but it's still the book for those characters. And you don't see it in this type of grade. And I think that this one was a good buy. Doctor Strange books have been pulling back, and I think they are getting to the point where you want to start picking them up again. But I think this book, based on where it had sold historically, this was an incredible purchase. And like I said, even the $72,000 purchase a few months ago, I think that person long-term is going to be happy as well. But all right, let's move to number 4. This is a really interesting one to talk about. We'll definitely be checking out GPA for this one. So this is Amazing Fantasy 15. I always feel bad when I'm talking about Amazing Fantasy 15. I feel like I am just like crapping on this book all the time because the prices just keep coming down. And so I've talked about it a lot. But what makes this one especially interesting is this is the copy that there was some controversy about over the last couple weeks. There were some people that posted about it on Instagram, and then Dave with Comic Book Investments made a video about it as well. So what happened was this book popped up as sold about a month ago on my comic shop for $114,000. Then almost immediately it was on Comiclink. And everybody knows that this book has dropped considerably in price. So it was like, why would you buy a book for $114,000 and then immediately sell it knowing you're going to get hammered? I mean, look at this, $63,555 after the fees. Well, let's just say from my comic shop, you've got taxes and everything. You paid at least $120,000. And then with this one, you've got 10% fees to Comiclink. And so you're down at like $57,000. So this is a loss of at least $63,000. If not more than that. And so this is a huge loss on this book. But what was discovered is that my comic shop, this person had purchased this book in May and they had bought it on payments. They finished paying for the book in November. That's when they reported the sale. And so it popped up as this sale that looked really out of line, but it wasn't in May of this year. So, and that also shows you how much that book has dropped in the last 6 months. So let's take a look at Amazing Fantasy 15 because they've actually already moved it. After this got reported, GPA moved the sale date back to May when the sale actually happened, which is how it should be reported, in my opinion. I agree with that. So here's the 5.5. And so what had happened was it actually showed this peak right up here after this book had already dropped in other sales. It had had a sale of $75,000 and there was one available on eBay for like $70,000. And then all of a sudden it has this sale of 114, but this is that sale here. And so if we go to my comic shop, we pull up this book and you can see the last 5 digits are 47002. And if we go to, if we go to this one, 47002, it's the same book. It 100% is the exact same book. And I don't know what motivated the person to decide to sell it, if it was financial difficulties, if they were frustrated with seeing the prices drop and they just wanted to get rid of it, maybe tax losses for the year. I have no idea. I don't know what drove the decision to sell this book, but they did, and they took at least, like I said, about probably a $63,000 loss on it, which that would That's that's a tough pill to swallow. But this one I thought was really interesting because we had seen that other video, the controversy around this one. And honestly, this is where I think the book should be about right now. This book was selling for around 40 to 50,000 in the 2019-2020 range. So selling now around 60 to 65,000 seems very, very reasonable. This is a book that I've talked about this recently. We keep seeing copies come up for sale. I think Comiclink alone had at least 5 copies in this auction. They may have had more, but those were just the 5 I was watching. And last week was the first time I'd seen no Amazing Fantasy 15s on the Heritage Weekly auction. I'd seen them every week, maybe one exception, for months and months. There had been between 1 and 3 every single week, which I had never used to see. I used to see one come up maybe every 6 to 8 weeks, if even. And so this book has definitely gotten oversaturated in the market, which has brought the prices back down to, in my opinion, where they should be. So, I mean, if you look at this is that, this is the Amazing Fantasy 15. This is what I'm talking about. You had sales in the $40,000 to $50,000 range, generally for a few years between 2018 and 2020. And then you had this huge spike peaking at 120,000. And now it's pulled back to around 60. And that seems really reasonable to me. So I think that this is a book that if you've been waiting to get into an Amazing Fantasy 15, now I wouldn't rush out and buy one, but now is the time to really be watching, because I do expect that they'll start drying up a little bit more again. People have been selling them so much. I think that they likely won't come up quite as often just because the prices have come down so much. But all right, now we're going to get into the top 3. And these are the big ones. These are the books that broke 6 figures. All of these broke 100,000 or hit 100,000. First one, back to Incredible Hulk, number 181. This was a 9.8 that sold for 100,000, which based on recent sales was actually a pretty strong sale for this book. And the record, though, was 138,000, but that's just on GPA. Comiclink actually had a $146,000 sale on October 26th, which they talk about right here. But that sale was not pulled into GPA because GPA doesn't pull in Comiclink sales. So just something to always be aware of again, that GPA is a very good representation of the sales data, but it doesn't get everything. Now, this one, I've already talked about it. Total census, 16,303, universal, 12,963, 137 9.8s with that one 9.9. We've seen quite a few of these 9.8s come up for sale lately. There were a couple of them on Heritage. There was one on Golden. We had this one. I think there's maybe one other one as well, or maybe one other one coming up on Heritage. Oh yeah, that's right. There was a weekly on Heritage. So we've had maybe about 5 copies sell recently, which is quite a bit for this book. But yeah, it seems to be leveling out around the $90,000 to $100,000 range, which personally seems a little high to me. This is a book that was going for around 35 to 50,000 back in the 2019 to 2020 range. So I'm kind of expecting it to pull back to about the $60,000 to $70,000 range in this grade. But like I said, right now it seems to be hovering around 90 to 100. So we'll have to see how things play out if more copies come up for sale. All right, now let's move up to number 2. Actually had the exact same sales price. This Fantastic Four number 48, the CGC 9.8 that sold for $100,000. Let's take a close look at this one. Just a beautiful copy of this book. I mean, really is a stunning copy of this book. But this one, the record, this actually wasn't the record. Record was 108,000 in June of 2021, so about a year and a half ago. There are quite a few of these on the census, 8,715 with 7,390 universals. In a 9.8, there are actually 40. This is a book, I've talked about it in some other videos before. There was actually what's called a warehouse find, where basically they found boxes of undistributed copies of this book. And that's why in high grades, it's actually quite common. In one of my other videos I talked about recently, there was a 9.8 of Fantastic Four 49 that sold. That book sold for $192,000. That's because there are only 2 on census. And for a long time, there was only 1. The second one that actually came up for sale was a pretty recent grade. But that's why that book, even though this is technically the bigger one, this is the first Silver Surfer, first cameo of Galactus. 49 is the first full Galactus, second Silver Surfer, first cover. But in the lower grades, 48 sells for more. But in these high grades, because of rarity and grade, 49 sells for more. But yeah, just incredible to see this book come for sale in a 9.8. But all right, now what was the number one sale? Tales of Suspense, number 39. Sure, newbie, super excited about seeing this one. And now I know some people might go, oh my gosh, CBCS, top of the list. Don't get too excited. This was a horrible sale for this book. This was just awful. Now, great for the buyer. I mean, I think the buyer got a steal on this book. Seller, this is why you don't want to send these types of books into CBCS. I mean, oof, and I'll get into why. So $150,001, which, yeah, sounds like a lot, until you look at what this book sold for in a CGC 9.6. In 2013, so 9 years ago, a 9.6 sold for $275,000. And if you think prices have stayed flat for this book or gone down since 2013, you would be very wrong. And so this sale price, just terrible. And I mean, this is what I talk about with CBCS. I mean, I like their cases. I think it's crazy that this type of premium you get this type of discount sometimes with CBCS books, but this is enough to really, that should scare you if you're submitting books to CBCS for selling. If you're just submitting them to get them graded, you don't care about resale, that's one thing. But if you are submitting for selling, I mean, this is the type of thing that should really worry you, because this is an amazing copy. I would not be shocked if the person that bought this, the instant they get it, they're cracking it out and sending it to CGC to get reslabbed. I mean, worst case, and I don't think it's even possible, say it gets a 9.2. A 9.2 CGC sold on November 17th of this year for $168,000. That is $18,000 more than this at a 9.2. And I mean, look at this thing. It's stunning. I mean, it is a stunning book. This is every bit of a 9.6. I mean, even if it got a 9.4, even if it got a 9.2, it's worth resubmitting to CGC to get that different piece of plastic on the outside, because man, this is a stunning book. It's almost the full quotes. You've got 1.5 quotes over here. You've got the blue underneath the table here. Those are the things people are looking for with this book, the little extras. And it's a 9.6 white, white pages for $150,000. I mean, geez. So total census for this book, 2,609. Universal copies, there are 1,946. On the CGC census, there are 5 and a 9.6 and just one higher. But man, yeah, with CGC, let's take a look at GPA with this one, because this is one that I think we really need to show how big of a deal this is, that sold for just $150,000. I mean, that, gosh, you'll see. It's pretty bad. So let's take a look at that 9.2. So if we look at a 9.2, so the 9.6, this last sale here was in 2013. Let's look at a 9.2. Let's look at what it sold for in 2013. 2013, 9.2. Selling for $47,800 on the low end, $60,000 on the high end. It's now selling for about 2.5 times that, even a little more than that. So you can't extrapolate perfectly. I don't think this would go for 2.5 times what it sold for in 2013. If it did, that would be about $700,000. But I think this book easily is a $500,000 book now in a 9.6. And I wouldn't be shocked if it hit about 700,000. I would not be shocked if it hit that number. And so whoever got it for 150,000. I mean, think about that. If they get this thing re-slabbed and it hits a 9.6, you better believe you're going to see that book pop up for sale pretty soon, because that person just turned 150,000 probably into $600,000 or $700,000, and they would have done it in the matter of a month, because it's going to be walkthrough. They're going to send it to someone. They're going to say, press this book immediately, take care of it, crack it out, send it in, and it's going to get taken care of. And they're going to come back with probably minimum a 9.4. And that 9.4, based on this, will probably achieve something like 300,000. But if they pull a 9.6 and they get $600,000 or $700,000, I mean, yeah, I would have bought that book all day, every day, if I had $150,000 to spend on that comic. Because, yeah, I think I obviously haven't seen every sale in this auction, but that might have been one of the best sales in the auction. And the crazy thing is, it was the most expensive book that sold. So, yeah, man, I thought that one was this one was really interesting, because just that CBCS discount on this book was real. This, jeez, 150,000 for what arguably, if it pulls a 9.6, could be a $500,000 to $700,000 book. So definitely congratulations to whoever picked this one up, because that was a total steal. All right, so that is the last of the books. I'm going to cut back over into the the other screen, and we'll close out this video. All right, so I hope you enjoyed that video. Some awesome books. Really a lot of downtrends for some of these books. Maybe a couple that are looking like a good time to start, maybe picking them up again. But hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this. I've got more videos over here if you'd like to watch some of my other videos, and the subscription button right here. If you'd like to subscribe to the channel, I'd really appreciate it. And I will see you in the next video.